Hello, this segment is honoring the veterans in our midst in the community. And we're so delighted that we have two people who are residents and we're introducing you to a member of the staff. So stay tuned and listen to the stories they tell about how they were veterans protecting us and how we thank them. You'll be meeting Pete Weiland, Neil O'Leary, and a new person in our midst, Frank Pastor, the art teacher. I'm so glad to be in this wonderful place, and you can tell it's the art studio, to talk to Frank Pastor and welcome him to Stonebridge because not many people have met him. So I'm glad to introduce him today as the person that comes here as the art teacher, but he refers to himself as the drawing teacher, and so we want to hear a little bit more about that. But I also am glad that we're talking to him in order to pay our respects to him as a veteran in this segment, which we are focusing on honoring our veterans. So Frank, tell us a little bit about why you say drawing teacher.
Well, I have students that love to paint, watercolor, and to do that, you should know how to draw. And that it all leads up to a more beautiful type of work. No matter what you're going to do, what medium you use, you still have to learn to draw.
Yeah, we were talking about the basis of artwork, basically, being drawing, and some of your pictures are here, which we hope to get a snapshot of before we conclude. But out of that has come some really wonderful pictures here, and it was your talent scouting, I guess, that resulted in people here from Stonebridge being in a show in Somerset. Can you tell about that?
Yes, in Meadow Lakes, another place that I teach drawing, we participate in the Mercer County Senior Art Show. So I started here and I said, you know, I don't know why they don't do that here. So that's why I started and I pushed to get that. And as a result, we had two first place artworks. One of the ladies is 101 years old.
Oh,
her name
our
is
friend Rosalie Berger.
Rosalie, and the other one is Marcia Atkinson. Yeah, and so you never know what's going to come out of it.
Right, and Marcia was working in pencil, I think, wasn't she? And Rosalie was...
she started off learning to draw a little bit, and she started, doing the oil paints. We jumped back and forth.
Right. It confirms your theory that you have to start out drawing and then you can do a lot of other things.
Picasso was a great, what they call a mechanic. He was a great artist, with pencil and charcoal. But that's how it starts, and you have to learn the basic things. It's like laying a foundation for a house. Yeah. If you don't have a good foundation, you're not going to have a good house.
Right. You probably have to have a very good conception too of what you want the house to be.
Right.
Yeah. And so Frank, you're here on Mondays and Fridays.
Right.
It's sort of for the afternoon, and anyone who wants to try some artwork can come here and find a nice seat. And we're surrounded by products of people's work. It's really wonderful.
I play music. And, I love music, and I love to. It's very relaxing. When I was at Meadow Lakes, there was a lady there that she passed away, but we're looking at the therapy part of this, and it's very good for people, that are maybe depressed or they missed their husband or something. Right. It just fills in a gap. It fills in a void that. Right. And it takes their mind off the other thing. Because when I do it, I challenge them. I just don't. I say this. You have to. People need direction, I guess. And you sort of go that way. Right.
And how nice to be creative when you didn't think you would be creative anymore. I think that it's just
what happens is as they go along, they start to see, oh, I can do this, or I like to do that, and That's how it happens.
Right. So, when we were talking about what you did in the armed forces, it was relating to what you love to do,
Yeah.
believe it or not. So tell us your story there. You went
Well,
into the Army, was it?
Yeah, well, I started off, I went in the Army as a basic infantryman, which everybody does. And, then little by little, I worked my way up to a staff sergeant, and I was in charge of a motor pool, and which was okay, but
This was
Then-
in the mid-60s, right?
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I went into the military academy at Seagirt, and they trained officers, and I did all the whatever they needed, plaques.
Would you call that graphic design, sort of?
I guess.
It was,
you know,
I mean, it was creative, right?
Well, yeah. See, they have a thing in the Army. It's called MOS, and that's what you do. And everybody has an MOS number, and that's your job number. And I was a graphic artist, so from there, and then I just kept doing that until I was discharged. And
For a long time.
yeah,
Yeah.
I loved it. I worked in the museum at Seagirt. I did plaques for walls.
Did you do signs to tell people what to do? No?
No. I made a wooden sign, New Jersey Military Academy. And I made it all out of wood, 3 layers of plywood, and I cut all the letters out with a little jigsaw, and it was fun. It was fun. The good days. So I enjoyed it.
Well, and you didn't get sent out of the country because I guess that was a time that the military was cutting back.
Almost.
Yeah.
President Johnson stopped the war, and that was it. We didn't have to go anywhere.
And so your military career really led to not only service to the country, but to a good outcome that you've been inspiring other people with your love of, I guess, design and
It's been a good trip. It's been a good trip, and I hope to keep going on for a while. And then I ended up at Meadow Lakes and now Stonebridge, and maybe another place. So.
Right. Well,
But it's fun. It's fun. Look at this lady, Rosalie.
Yeah, we have a
101 years
picture of
old,
hers.
and then Marcia's
Yes.
89, and then the other people. It just goes on and on and on. And Hope.
right, right behind us, yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, thank you for what you're doing for Stonebridge and for
I
people here.
I love being here.
Do
We
you?
have very nice people working here, like Brooke.
Yeah.
And, Robin was great too. She's moved on, but we have some good people here.
Well, we
Very
do,
good
and we
people.
have good residents who are very gregarious. They like to be with each other, and I think they appreciate appreciating other people here.
Yeah.
So nice.
Very
And we
nice.
appreciate you. Thank you for your service as we think about honoring veterans, but also thank you for being a part of our life here at Stonebridge.
Yeah,
I really appreciate
I
it.
appreciate that. So,
Well, thank you so much. We're glad we could introduce you to a whole lot of other people here. I am very delighted to be talking with Pete Weiland, a resident here at Stonebridge, a rather new one. It'll be sort of a year that you've been here soon.
In January, yes.
Yeah. And we wanted to hear his story in our celebration of the veterans among us. There are many, and we of course are grateful to them, as well as to the veterans that are in our own families and our friendship circles. I've asked Peter to tell us, I guess you go by Pete, right?
Pete,
I'm saying
I do,
that
yes.
right all the time. To tell us what got him, what was the beginning of the story of being a veteran? Because we've heard a little bit from him in a evening program on the Intrepid, and it says it on his hat, so we're going to find out a little bit more about that. And also he was in the latest View from the Bridge, talking about something that if you haven't read it, be prepared to be a little scared by it. But we'd like to know a little bit more about your story. How did it all start, that you are now a veteran? Did you enlist? Did you, were drafted? What was the time?
Okay. Oh, I think it's an interesting story. I was born in the early 30s, like many of the people here, and so during the war I was old enough to follow it and be interested in it. And we followed it by reading the newspapers and listening to the radio. There was no television or anything like that. But once a week, the movie theaters, before the main feature on Saturday night, would show a black and white Newsweek the Week review. And I remember my parents taking me to the movie, and I watched this News in the Week review, and I saw people taking off of aircraft carriers and airplanes and landing on aircraft carriers. And when I was in 5th grade, I said, I'm going to be a Navy pilot. That's how I got introduced to the Navy. So when I graduated from high school, I took a competitive examination, won a Navy ROTC scholarship to Princeton. And I went to Princeton. It was in the Navy ROTC during that time.
That early, yeah.
Yeah. So while other classmates were going to Paris and Copenhagen for the summers, I spent the summers at sea in the Navy, and I loved it. And when I graduated, I was commissioned in the Navy, and I went into the flight program, Pensacola.
That was your choice to do that.
Absolutely.
They didn't assign you.
They don't push anybody into that program.
Okay.
In fact, I felt lucky to get in because quite a few people were rejected for one reason or another.
Right. Well, now we know from your talk that this very large aircraft carrier known as Intrepid that many people now visit, I guess it's one of the few that you really can experience, that you actually landed on the Intrepid. Is that right?
That's right. I became a Navy pilot, and I wanted to be a carrier pilot, so I flew single-engine airplanes, single-engine propeller-driven attack airplanes, and I made almost all my landings on the Intrepid. I was on the Intrepid off and on for a 2-year period, and I have 100 landings on the Intrepid.
Right.
Same number of landings as I have takeoffs. Thank goodness. And that was quite an experience for me.
I can imagine. Let me give you an analogy. My granddaughter is a diver, was state ranked, and went off the high diving board. And I would ask her, what was it like the first time that you went off the high diving board and it all worked? Obviously you're here. That's sort of the question I have for you. What was it like the first time that you had to get that plane in just the right spot and have everybody there to tie it up and so on? Do you remember the first one?
Oh, of course. In order to graduate from Pensacola Naval Basic Air Training, you have to make 8 carrier landings. And we trained for them. We trained hard for them. We all knew our lives depended on it. And it was much less of a climax than I thought it would be, because we were well prepared for it. I had many more exciting experiences on the Intrepid, landings at night.
And what theater, I guess, as they call that, were you in?
Yes. The Intrepid at the time was based in Norfolk, Virginia, and we made cruises to the Mediterranean. So I made a 7-month cruise to the Mediterranean in 1959, and that was called the Cold War. And the Cold War today is described as a peaceful time, but to us it wasn't peaceful.
Right.
We didn't think it was peaceful, and it wasn't peaceful. The Russians would occasionally shoot down planes, and we operated right on the edge of the Soviet sphere there in the Mediterranean, and we were ready to go. We had airplanes loaded, even when we were in port. When we went into port in the Mediterranean Sea, we didn't tie up alongside the dock.
Right.
We anchored out so that we could drop the anchor and go on short notice.
Right.
And so the Cold War was peaceful, it turned out, but we weren't so sure it was going to be that way.
I think maybe the public felt that way too. There was a lot of uncertainty.
I think there was a lot of
yeah,
anxiety and
yeah,
uncertainty.
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah. You volunteered to bring your jacket, and I encouraged you. So you have a new hat, but the jacket looks like it's sort of seen its own.
The jacket has seen a little time,
Okay,
that's
right,
right.
right.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
Was that something that you wore on the ship, or is this a sort of a souvenir?
No, when you get into an airplane on a July afternoon and it's 93 degrees, it's nice and warm, okay? But when you go up to 20,000 feet, it's cold. And so we always wore the jacket
Right.
flying. And so they got a lot of use. And they're very useful.
Right, and it has a nice Intrepid signature there,
That's
and
right.
what is this?
This is my squadron patch.
Oh,
This
your-
is VAW-12, and it shows a bat, which means we carried radar. It shows a nighttime.
A nice bat.
Yes, yeah, good bat. That means we were day-night, we flew days and nights, and in my day, some of the planes did not fly at night.
Yeah.
And all weather, we flew day-night, all weather. I remember
Wonderful
being,
symbol, yeah.
yeah, I remember being catapulted off the Intrepid one day when the waves were coming over the bow. Now, the bow is 70 feet over water, okay? So the bow was, I guess, dropping 35 feet and the water
Yeah.
waves were 35
Right,
feet.
right.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was very interesting. Actually, the takeoff was the easy part, it turned out.
Imagine.
But we were trained enough and I
Yeah.
got back safely.
Right, so
Every time.
I was going to ask you about, well, what happened after you were in the service and returned to, civilian life.
Civilian life,
But I
yeah.
guess the story really is that you've never given up on the Intrepid.
That's true. I loved being in the Navy and being a pilot, but at the end of my 4-year commitment, I ran into a red-headed Irish lady, and somehow that truncated my
That sort
military
of
service.
seems much more common than,
Right. So
for good purpose, yeah.
We've been married 61 years now. So I got out of the Navy and went to work, and we had 3 boys and we have 7 grandchildren.
Wow.
And when the Intrepid was brought to New York City as a Naval Aviation Museum, I decided to volunteer on it. And so I volunteered for 15 or 18 years,
Yeah.
I guess, showing people around, telling stories.
Right.
And I enjoyed that very much. And one of the things that surprised me about that is the women enjoyed the visits, the tours, every bit as much
Yes,
as the men.
yeah.
They focused on some different things,
Right.
but they were all very
Yeah,
interested.
yeah.
And one day, I took my then 7-year-old granddaughter for a tour of the Intrepid. And we spent 2 hours wandering around this enormous ship. And she said, "Oh, Papa, this ship is so big." And I said, "No, sweetheart, it's small." Because to me,
Yeah, right.
it's not small, it's
Right.
tiny.
Yeah.
And so she couldn't understand how such a big ship could be small. So I wrote this
book, yeah.
This book.
I guess, is there a copy in the library?
Yes, it's
Yeah,
in the
okay.
library,
Okay.
yeah.
Let him over
Yeah.
There you go.
there we go, that's good.
Okay. Well, it's-
So
it's-
big yet so small.
Right.
And so what I describe in the book is how big the ship is. And then I describe how small it is.
Right.
And the conclusion is it's both big and small at the same time. And when I read the book to classes,
Yeah.
grade school classes, I tell them at the beginning, you're not going to believe this, but I'm going to prove that something can be big and small at the same time. So I've had a lot of fun with the book.
Yeah, well, I'm delighted that you were willing to share with us your adventures and your service, because I think we are all indebted as we look back on what we've been through in we share long lives here.
Yes.
And can remember many different times that we knew that people were protecting our country while we were still safe at home. So thank you for talking with us today, and also let me offer my thanks from the whole community for what our veterans have done for us.
Well,
Thanks a lot.
thank you, that's very nice of you to say that, it's very nice, I appreciate it.
I'm very glad to be speaking with Neil O'Leary, one of the veterans in our community. And some of you may have remembered that Mr. O'Leary spoke at a Saturday evening program and discussed his experiences with a submarine, or more than one submarine, I'm not quite sure.
Right.
And but today, as we are honoring our veterans and thanking them for their service, I'd like to start with, how did you become a veteran? What got you into the service to begin with, Neil?
Well, I was not patriotic. I was in high school. I was a senior in 1952. The Korean War was grabbing a lot of people through the draft. I did not want to go to Korea and end up in the foxhole, so I joined the Navy. Actually, I was going to join the Air Force, but my father said that I'd be better off in the Navy. He had a reserve commission in the Navy in 1928 because he was in the Merchant Marine most of his life. So I joined the Navy, and that was the best choice I made up to that point in my life. Joined for 4 years, and after boot camp, I was sent to radio school, which was a 6-month school. Half the time was in electronics. The other half was learning Morse code and sending messages and so forth.
And where was that?
That was in Maryland,
Geographic,
Bainbridge, Maryland, where the initial training was. Bainbridge, Maryland was a big base. It was the East Coast boot camp, and it had a lot of what is known as Class A schools. When I finished the radio school, the way the Navy operated, if you're in the top 10% of your class, you could pick where you're going. They'd give you a list of commands that we're looking for, in my case, radio. And so I picked a wooden minesweeper that was new construction because I thought it would be small and they wouldn't be over-regulated like the big ships have a lot of regulations. I was not that type of person. It turned out to be a terrible choice on my part.
Yeah, what is that? Would we know that kind of a ship that is?
Yeah, well, the officers were okay. Actually, it was the enlisted men that were bad. And what got me on a submarine was we were up in Newport testing. This was a minesweeper. We were testing the mine equipment that we have, equipment to detect and remove mines. And I left a hat on my bunk, and I was written up for gear drift, so I was restricted to the ship and the pier for a period of 1 week.
For getting your hat.
Just leaving my hat on the bunk. That really got me annoyed. And it just so happened a submarine came in and tied up on the opposite side of the pier, and I was wondering if they were in the same Navy, because half the people left in civilian clothes, to go ashore.
For sure, yeah.
None of us had civilian clothes on board. So anyway, I went over there, spoke to the watch. Subs, when they're tied up, have 2 people on watch. One standing at the gangway, just making sure that the only crew can get aboard are people who are authorized, and the other person below decks, who is has to be qualified submarine and a petty officer, who has to check on a lot of different valves and so forth. And so anyway, the man on the watch on the deck calls below. That person came up, brought me down. I wanted to see what a sub was all about. Brought me through the sub, and the subs have a almost straight back and forth alley.
Like a main corridor.
Main corridor.
Yeah.
And so
Can
you go through the
stand up
wardroom.
there? Can you stand up?
Yes.
in the corridor?
Except when you go from compartment to compartment, you have to bend down because subs can segregate each compartment. And when you dive, you close each compartment off in case you have a leak. Anyway, this watch brought me into the wardroom, which you had to pass through actually, and he had to talk to the duty officer, and the duty officer introduced himself as Joe so-and-so. I'm the duty officer. Now, he didn't use first name, he didn't say I'm lieutenant, and I said to myself, hey, this is very relaxed here. So he asked me what I did and explained. I said to him I was a radioman, and he said, we really need radiomen, and he said, you get extra money on submarines, and we have very good food and so forth. And so he convinced me to apply for subs. And in the meantime, I sat as we walked through the sub, the crew was eating lunch, and I ate lunch with them. And so I went back
It was pretty good, huh?
That was wonderful. You ate family style, no lines. You sat down, a platter was passed with if it were chicken or steak, and if it was steak, it'd be well done or medium and so forth. And if you didn't like what you got, you told the cook that it was no good, and you get another piece. It was fantastic. I always thought we were spoiled. So anyway, I applied for sub duty, and the first thing you have to do is you have to go be tested in a compression chamber at 50 pounds pressure per square inch. Atmospheric is about 14.8, but you have to be able to go down 100 feet. You have to do a 100-foot escape as part of the training, and to do that, the pressure at 100 feet is 45 pounds per square inch. To be on the safe side, you had to get 50 pounds per square inch in a compression chamber for 15 minutes. And if you got by that, then you were interviewed by a psychiatrist. And if you got by that, you went to sub school. And so
you passed all the tests.
it was very quick. And next thing is I was in New London going to sub school. And when I finished sub school, again, if you're in the top 10% of your class, you could pick where you want. In the sub case, you would pick what location. And I picked Key West, Florida. We had 2 squadrons. Each squadron was 8 subs, 16 subs in Key West.
So if you were in Key West, were you assigned to a certain theater, as they say?
Well, we were very close to Guantanamo, Cuba. So we always had 1, 2, or 3 subs in Guantanamo. Spent a lot of time down there. What we did in Guantanamo essentially was act like Russian submarines, and we'd be chased all day by destroyers. So, but anyway, I reported to the sub, which was the Baleo, USS Baleo, SS-285, and there was 2 other radiomen there, and I became the 3rd man. We had 3 watches, so you need 3 of each of the skills. The chief radioman was a World War II veteran, very unique guy, didn't drink, smoke, or curse. Very calm, and I got to know him after several months, and I was able to ask him about his experiences in the war. And he was on 2 subs that were sunk. What happened was he was on a sub, he came back from a war patrol, he was transferred to another sub, the sub he was on went out and never came back. And the other radioman was very interesting. He had the best working vocabulary of anyone I've ever seen except William F. Buckley. And so I asked him one time, how come you have this vocabulary? He said, both my parents were English professors at the University of Wisconsin. When I was young, I would have to have a dictionary at dinner to understand what they were talking about. He went back there. He had 2 years of college. He left because he was becoming an alcoholic and he wanted to get away from the college environment. And so he spent 4 years and then went back. He was always reading books on Indian philosophy. That's what he studied. Ended up getting a doctorate, and he ended up actually getting a Fulbright scholarship. He went to India and studied. Anyway, so I spent several months on the Baleo, and then we had an extra radioman, and the captain decided that I was going to get transferred to the Batfish.
The Batfish.
That was the second sub I was at. Batfish was actually, the Batfish was a famous World War II submarine. It got a presidential unit citation for one of the war patrols, during which it sunk 3 Japanese submarines amongst a bunch of other ships. And I stayed on the Batfish till my enlistment was up.
And by that time it was,
4 years.
okay. And so it sounds like you had quite a unique experience.
Right.
But being in a submarine, I imagine, takes a toll on, I don't know what it is, to keep being cooped up. What does that mean?
Well, if the confinement didn't bother you, it was wonderful. The food was outstanding. It was probably the most democratic service we had. I mean, I would talk to the captain like I'm talking to you folks right now.
Yeah.
And in fact, the captain would make comments on something, and I'd say, why? And he'd tell me why he's doing what he was doing. Rest of the fleet, you wouldn't get that type of experience.
Right. So it was a good experience.
Very
for
good.
you, and you grew, and then you continued to talk about it and,
Yeah.
and teach other people about how subs work, right?
Yes. Then I got, when I was in, we had the Korean GI Bill, so I had 4 years of college and some graduate school. So the service was a very good deal when you get right down to it, because it got me a college education and some graduate school.
Right. Well, I'm certainly glad that there was a good future in it for you, but I guess one of the things we need to honor among our veterans is really courage and steadfastness, and you certainly showed that, being in a very precarious situation at the time in the world, and keeping us safe.
Right. Well, American submarines actually were the safest subs that were in World War II. The Japanese, we had 52 sunk. During the war, there was a congressional committee to get an update on the war activities, and they went to Hawaii, and they were briefed by the Navy. And someone, actually a congressman by the name of May, his last name was May, asked how come our subs were able to avoid being sunk at the rate they were doing. You know, we had few lost. And he was told that the Japanese were setting the depth charges too shallow. So when he came back and had a press conference, he announced that. And the admiral in charge of submarines figured that cost us 10 submarines and 800 men. He should have been put in jail for the rest of his life,
for
in my
revealing
opinion.
yeah.
Now, the Germans lost 790 submarines, which was a tremendous
That's
number.
really a lot.
30,000 men.
Yeah. But you weren't participating in that war.
No,
That
no.
was the lore of,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, Neil, that is just really fascinating. What did you do then with your college degree? And
When I finished college, I was interviewed. I went to Manhattan College in New York City, and I had several job offers when I got out. I selected Con Edison, and which was a good choice. I left Con Ed after a while because I didn't think I was advancing fast enough, and I spent a bit more than 3 years with RCA programming computers. RCA had a very good computer, was highly competitive with IBM. And while I was there, the industrial relations vice president, Con Ed, contacted me and wanted to recruit me back to Con Ed. And so they made a very good offer, and I came back, and I had a good career there.
well, we want to thank you for that too. I think we don't recognize how important utilities are in keeping us going and keeping us safe and protected. So today we want to say that we really want to respect our veterans and thank you for your service. And I would add your service at Con Edison. We couldn't live without that kind of utility in our lives. So thank you so much, and thank you for telling us your story.
Thank you.
Okay. And there you have it, another person who has given so much for all of us that we are really grateful, act as a kind of symbol, but also in reality did give us many years of their lives for the safety of all of us.